The afternoon sun filtered through the gauze curtains of my daughter-in-law's living room, casting soft patterns across the cream-coloured carpet. I sat in the corner armchair, the one nobody ever used, sipping tea from a cup so delicate I was afraid my calloused fingers might crack it. Around me, voices rose and fell in a symphony of panic I didn't quite understand yet. My daughter-in-law Rebecca stood in the centre of the room like a queen holding court, her perfectly manicured hands pressed to her cheeks. Even in distress, she managed to look like she'd stepped out of a magazine spread. Her honey-blonde hair fell in calculated waves around her shoulders, and her cream silk blouse probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Not that I would know. I drove a 12-year-old Honda and bought my clothes at discount stores. "It's gone," Rebecca announced again, her voice pitching higher. "The necklace is completely gone." Her mother, Patricia, circled the coffee table like a shark scenting blood. She wore a designer pantsuit in navy blue, her silver hair styled in that particular way wealthy women over 60 seemed to favour. Sharp, severe, every strand lacquered into place. "When did you last see it, darling?" Patricia's voice dripped with concern, but her eyes were already scanning the room, calculating, assessing. "This morning. I'm certain of it." Rebecca's voice trembled. "I took it off after breakfast and left it on my dresser. I always leave it there." My son Marcus stood by the window, his jaw tight. He'd inherited his father's height and quiet presence, along with that same habit of watching everything before speaking. His hands were shoved deep in his pockets, and I could see the tension in his shoulders from across the room. Rebecca's father, Donald, emerged from the hallway with his phone pressed to his ear. He was red-faced, his expensive polo shirt straining across his middle, the kind of man who'd made money in real estate and never let anyone forget it. "The security footage is being pulled now," he announced, snapping his phone shut with the authority of someone used to getting answers. "We'll see exactly who entered that bedroom today." That's when Rebecca's sister Melissa spoke up from her perch on the sofa arm. She was younger than Rebecca by 3 years, dressed in tight jeans and an off-shoulder top, her dark eyes glittering with something that looked like anticipation. "Well, who else has been upstairs today?" Melissa tilted her head, false innocence coating every word. "I mean, besides family." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Patricia's gaze swiveled toward me for just a fraction of a second before sliding away. But I caught it. That flicker of assessment, that moment of consideration. "Mother went upstairs to use the powder room," Rebecca said slowly. Her voice had changed. The panic had been replaced by something else, something harder. "Around 11. I set my teacup down gently on the side table. The porcelain made a soft click against the wood. "Yes," I said quietly. "I did." 5 pairs of eyes locked onto me. Patricia crossed her arms, her perfectly painted lips pressing into a thin line. "I see." The words hung in the air like an accusation wrapped in politeness. "Mother," Marcus said sharply, taking a step forward. But I held up one hand, stopping him. My boy had always been quick to defend me, but this was my battle. "You were the only non-family member upstairs," Donald said, his voice booming with certainty. "We need to be practical about this." Non-family member. The words landed like a slap. I'd been married to their son and brother for 6 months. Apparently that didn't count. "Oh, I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding," Patricia said, but her tone suggested she was sure of no such thing. "But these things happen. Some people see beautiful items and well, they can't help themselves." Rebecca bit her lip, looking at me with an expression that might have been pity if it weren't for the cold calculation behind it. "Mother Marcus, I don't want to accuse anyone, but that necklace was my grandmother's. It's worth $75,000. 75,000, she said it slowly, deliberately, like she wanted to make sure I understood the magnitude, like she wanted to make sure I knew it was more money than someone like me could possibly comprehend. "Some people," Melissa added, examining her nails with studied disinterest, "might see something like that and think it's an opportunity. Especially if they're, you know, not used to having nice things." Marcus moved like lightning, crossing the room in 3 strides. What exactly are you implying about my mother? Nothing, Melissa said quickly, but her smirk remained. Just saying that everyone has their struggles, some people more than others. I watched them all. Patricia with her arms crossed and her mouth pursed. Donald with his red face and puffed chest. Melissa with her calculating eyes, and Rebecca standing in the centre like a Victorian heroine, one hand pressed to her throat where that necklace should have been. They thought I took it. They didn't say it directly, of course, that would have been too crude, too obvious. But the insinuation hung in every word, every loaded pause, every meaningful glance. The mother-in-law who drove an old car and wore supermarket clothes. The woman who'd married their precious son only 6 months ago, the outsider. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger yet, not hurt, just a profound disappointment in human nature. I understand this is upsetting, I said calmly. Losing something valuable always is. Valuable, Patricia repeated, her eyebrow arching. Yes. Perhaps more valuable than you realize. The implication was clear. Too valuable for someone like you to resist. Marcus's face had gone pale with fury. I want everyone to stop talking, right now, before something is said that can't be taken back. Sweetheart, Rebecca said, moving toward him with her hands outstretched. We're just trying to figure out what happened. Nobody is accusing anyone of anything. Really? Marcus's voice could have cut glass. Because it sounds exactly like you're accusing my mother of theft. We're simply being logical, Donald blustered. The necklace was there. Then certain people went upstairs. Now it's not there. 2 + 2 = 4. Your math, I said quietly, might need checking. All eyes swung back to me. I stood slowly, smoothing down my simple cotton skirt. It was navy blue, bought on clearance 3 years ago. Paired with a white blouse I'd owned for a decade. My only jewellery was my wedding ring and a small pair of pearl studs my mother had given me when I turned 18. Perhaps, I said, keeping my voice level, we should wait for the security footage before making accusations. I'm not accusing, Rebecca insisted, but her voice had taken on a defensive edge. I'm just stating facts. Facts, I repeated. The fact that I used the bathroom. The fact that your necklace is missing. And therefore the logical conclusion is that I took it. She's twisting our words, Melissa said to her sister. I turned to look at her directly. She was young, probably 25 at most, and her face carried that particular expression of superiority that comes from never having been truly challenged in life. Am I? I asked. Then please, babe, tell me what words I should be hearing instead. Melissa's eyes flashed. Look, I'm just saying that some people might look at a $75,000 necklace and see an opportunity, especially if they're not exactly swimming in money themselves. Melissa, Marcus warned, his voice low and dangerous, but she continued, emboldened by her family's silent support. I mean, no offense, but you drive a car that's older than my last relationship. You shop at Target. Your clothes are… She waved her hand vaguely. Practical. Practical, I echoed. Yes, that's one word for it. Patricia stepped forward, her voice taking on a syrupy quality that was somehow worse than her earlier coolness. Dear, I think what everyone is trying to say is that we understand. Times are hard. The cost of living is so high these days. And when someone is used to a certain lifestyle and then sees how others live, it can be overwhelming. I felt Marcus tense beside me, but I placed my hand gently on his arm. You think I'm overwhelmed by wealth, I said. Not a question. A statement. We're not judging, Patricia continued, her voice dripping with false compassion. We all have our circumstances, but that necklace needs to be returned. If it was taken accidentally, if it was just a momentary lapse in judgment, we can handle this quietly. Quietly. Without police, without scandal. Just return the necklace, admit your inferiority, accept your place. Donald nodded vigorously. Exactly. We can keep this in the family. No need for things to get ugly. Ugly, I repeated softly. Rebecca moved closer. her eyes glistening with what might have been tears but felt more like theatre. "Mother Marcus, if you have it, please just give it back. We won't press charges. We'll say it was all a mistake. We can move past this." The royal we. The magnanimous offer of forgiveness for a crime I hadn't committed. I looked at my son. Marcus's face had gone beyond pale into a furious red. His hands were clenched so tightly his knuckles had gone white. He was about to explode, to tear into his wife and her family with all the rage of a man watching his mother be slandered. But I shook my head slightly. "Not yet." "I see," I said calmly, turning back to Rebecca. "You're offering me a chance to confess to something I didn't do in exchange for your silence about my supposed theft." "We're offering you grace," Patricia corrected, her voice sharp. "Grace?" I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. "How generous." "Mum," Marcus started, but I squeezed his arm. I reached into my purse, a simple black leather bag I'd bought at Marshall's 5 years ago, and pulled out my phone. My fingers moved slowly, deliberately as I pulled up my husband's contact and pressed call. "What are you doing?" Rebecca asked, her voice pitching higher. "Calling my husband," I said simply. The phone rang once, twice, then his familiar voice, warm and steady. "Everything all right, love?" "Darling," I said, keeping my eyes on Rebecca's family. "Remember that basket of necklaces you bought me? The one from the estate sale last month?" There was a pause, then a low chuckle that told me he understood exactly what was happening. "The basket with the 30 pieces? Yes, I remember. Could you bring it here to Rebecca's house? I think it might help clear up some confusion." Another pause. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. I hung up and placed my phone back in my purse. The room had gone silent. Everyone stared at me with varying expressions of confusion and suspicion. "What basket?" Melissa demanded. I didn't answer. Instead, I walked back to my chair and sat down, crossing my ankles in the way my mother had taught me ladies should sit. Proper posture, quiet dignity, the habits of a different upbringing than these people assumed I'd had. The silence stretched out, uncomfortable and thick. Patricia kept glancing at Donald, who kept glancing at his watch. Rebecca stood frozen in the middle of the room, her theatrical tears dried up, replaced by uncertainty. Marcus stood behind my chair, his hand resting on the back of it. I could feel his tension, his barely contained fury. But he trusted me. He always had. Melissa broke first. "I don't understand what you think this proves. Some basket of fake jewelry isn't going to—" "Nobody said they were fake," I interrupted softly. Her mouth snapped shut. We waited. I sipped my tea, which had gone lukewarm. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, marking each awkward second. Patricia whispered something to Donald, who shrugged and whispered back. Rebecca had moved to the sofa, perching on its edge like a bird ready to flee. Finally, the doorbell rang. Marcus moved to answer it, returning moments later with my husband. James carried a wicker basket in both hands, the kind you might use for storing magazines or blankets, but the weight of it was evident in the way he walked. Careful and steady. He was dressed as he always was. Khaki pants, a simple button-down shirt in pale blue, scuffed loafers. His grey hair was neatly trimmed but not styled. He looked like a retired schoolteacher or maybe an accountant, certainly not like one of the wealthiest men in the city. We'd worked hard to look that way. "Hello, everyone," James said with his characteristic calm. His eyes swept the room, taking in the hostile tableau, and landed on me with a small, knowing smile. "I brought the basket." He set it down on the coffee table with a soft thunk that spoke of substantial weight. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Patricia leaned forward slightly, trying to peer into the basket. I watched her eyes widen. "May I?" I asked my husband. "Of course, love." I stood and moved to the basket. Slowly, deliberately. I began removing the contents and laying them on the coffee table. One by one, piece by piece. A diamond necklace with a pendant the size of a quarter. A ruby choker set in white gold, an emerald piece with matching earrings, a sapphire strand that caught the light and threw blue fire across the ceiling. A vintage Art Deco number dripping with diamonds and platinum. Another, and another, and another. The pile grew. 30 necklaces, each one more stunning than the last, each one worth more than Rebecca's precious family heirloom. The coffee table disappeared under a fortune in gems and precious metals. Nobody spoke. The room had become a vacuum. All sound sucked away by shock. I selected a piece from the middle of the pile. A diamond necklace similar in style to the one Rebecca had described, but clearly superior in quality. The stones were flawless, the setting exquisite. "This one," I said, holding it up to the light. "Is this similar to the one you're missing?" Rebecca's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. Patricia had gone completely white. She gripped the arm of her chair so tightly I could see her knuckles protruding. Donald's red face had drained to a sickly grey colour. He looked like a man watching his entire worldview collapse in real time. Melissa just stared, her expression frozen somewhere between shock and horror. Or perhaps this one. I selected another piece. Or this. I'm afraid I have so many it's hard to keep track. What? Patricia's voice came out as a croak. She cleared her throat and tried again. What is this? This, I said calmly, gesturing to the glittering pile, is my jewellery collection. Well, part of it. The rest is in the safe at home. That's not possible, Melissa whispered. I looked at her directly. Not possible? Why? Because I shop at Target. She flinched. I turned to Patricia. Because my clothes are practical? Patricia's mouth had become a thin, bloodless line. I looked at Donald. Because I drive an old car. He couldn't meet my eyes. Finally, I looked at Rebecca. Because you assumed that anyone who lives modestly must be poor. Rebecca's perfect facade cracked. Tears welled in her eyes, real ones this time, but they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of mortification. The truth is, I continued, my voice still calm, still level. My husband and I choose to live simply. We don't believe in flaunting wealth. We don't need designer labels or luxury cars to feel valuable. We worked very hard for what we have, and we choose to keep it private. James moved to stand beside me, his hand finding mine. My wife, he said quietly, comes from old money, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. Her family has been wealthy for 4 generations, but she was raised to believe that class isn't about how much you spend. It's about how you treat others. Patricia made a small sound, almost like a whimper. When we married, I said, I fell in love with his kindness, his intelligence, his integrity. The fact that his software company made him a fortune was secondary. We decided together that we would live modestly, quietly. We would give to charity, support our community, and avoid the spotlight. I gestured to the pile of jewellery. These pieces, most of them are investment pieces from estate sales, history that should be preserved. We buy them to keep them safe, to appreciate their beauty, to eventually pass them on to museums or private collectors who will treasure them. But you, Donald started, then stopped. I what? I prompted. I don't look rich enough? I don't act entitled enough? I don't demand recognition for my wealth. Silence. When I came into this family, I said, looking at each of them in turn, I hoped to be welcomed. I knew I was different from you. You all wear your success like armour. You want everyone to know you've made it. And that's fine. That's your choice. I paused, letting my words sink in. But when something went missing today, instead of considering all possibilities, you immediately looked at the woman who doesn't fit your definition of wealthy. You saw my old car and my discount clothes and you thought, she must have taken it. She must have wanted what we have. We didn't, Rebecca started, but her voice failed. You did, Marcus said, his voice hard as stone. All of you. You looked at my mother and saw someone beneath you. Someone who would steal from you because she couldn't possibly have anything of her own worth having. Son, Donald began, his bluster completely gone. Don't call me son, Marcus snapped. You just accused my mother of theft because she has the audacity to live below her means. Patricia found her voice, though it trembled. We didn't know. How could we have known? You couldn't, I said, because we didn't tell you. That was intentional. We value privacy. But you know what you could have done? You could have treated me with basic respect. You could have given me the benefit of the doubt. You could have waited for actual evidence before making accusations. It wasn't an accusation, Melissa tried weakly. Yes, I said firmly, it was. Wrapped in politeness and false concern. But it was absolutely an accusation. You offered me grace if I would just confess. You promised to handle things quietly if I returned what I'd stolen. You patronized me and judged me and found me guilty without trial. The silence that followed was absolute. Then footsteps in the hallway. Everyone turned to see Rebecca's housekeeper, Maria, standing in the doorway. She was a small woman in her 50s, her grey hair pulled back in a neat bun, her expression anxious. I'm so sorry to interrupt, Maria said, her accent thick, her hands twisting together. But Miss Rebecca, I found your necklace. Every head swiveled toward her. What? Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. Maria held out her hand. In her palm lay the missing necklace, glittering in the afternoon light. I was cleaning the guest bathroom earlier, Maria explained, her words tumbling out in a rush. I found it in the drawer under the sink. You must have taken it off to wash your face and forgotten it there. I set it aside to give back to you after I finished cleaning, but then there was all this commotion and I didn't want to interrupt and— Thank you, Maria, I said gently. You can go now. She fled, clearly wanting to escape the tension in the room. Rebecca stared at the necklace in her hand like it was a snake. Her face had gone from pale to red to a mottled combination of both. Patricia made a small choking sound. Donald looked like he wanted the earth to open up and swallow him whole. Melissa had buried her face in her hands, the necklace that had started all of this, the $75,000 family heirloom that had been right there all along, not stolen, not taken, just forgotten. Well, I said into the silence, I'm glad that mystery is solved. I began gathering up my necklaces, placing them carefully back into the basket. Each piece made a soft clink as it settled against the others. The sound seemed abnormally loud in the shocked quiet. James helped me, his movements practiced and efficient. We'd done this before, unpacking treasures and packing them away again, enjoying them in private before returning them to safety. When the last piece was secured, I turned back to Rebecca's family. They stood or sat in various poses of humiliation, unable to look at me, unable to look at each other. I want you all to understand something, I said. This isn't about proving I'm wealthier than you. Wealth isn't a competition, and it doesn't determine worth. This is about respect. This is about the assumptions you made based on appearances. Patricia opened her mouth, but I held up my hand. You saw a woman who lives simply, and you assumed she was poor. You saw someone who didn't flaunt status, and you assumed she had no status to flaunt. And when something went wrong, your first instinct was to blame the outsider, the one who didn't fit your image of success. I looked at Rebecca directly. I came into this family with an open heart. I wanted to build a relationship with you, to be a good mother-in-law, to support you and Marcus in your marriage, but you never saw me as an equal. You saw me as less than. Someone to tolerate because you love my son, but never someone to respect on my own merit. Rebecca's tears were flowing freely now. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Sorry you misjudged me, I asked. Or sorry you got caught misjudging me, she flinched. I turned to Patricia and Donald. You raised your daughters to value appearances over character, to judge worth by price tags and brand names, to look down on anyone who doesn't perform wealth the way you do. That's not fair, Donald blustered, but his heart wasn't in it. Isn't it? James spoke up, his voice still calm but carrying an edge I recognized. You spent the last hour trying to pressure my wife into confessing to a crime she didn't commit. You used financial intimidation, social pressure, and moral judgment. And why? Because she doesn't drive a Mercedes. We made a mistake, Patricia said, her voice small. Yes, I agreed. You did. And the question now is what you'll do with that mistake. Marcus moved to my side, his hand on my shoulder. Mum, we should go. But I wasn't finished yet. I want you to know, I said, looking at each of them in turn, that I don't need your approval. I don't need your acceptance. I don't need you to understand my choices or validate my worth. I know who I am. My husband knows who I am. My son knows who I am. I picked up the basket, feeling its familiar weight. These necklaces, they're beautiful. They're valuable. They're pieces of history. But they don't define me. They're not what makes me worthy of respect. That should come automatically, simply because I'm a human being who deserves basic dignity. You're right, Rebecca said, her voice breaking. You're completely right. I was awful. We were all awful. Yes, I said simply. You were. Melissa looked up, her face streaked with tears and ruined makeup. What can we do? How can we make this right? I considered the question. These people had revealed themselves today. They'd shown me exactly what they thought of me, of people they considered beneath them. Some things once broken couldn't be repaired. I don't know if you can, I said honestly. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. Respect, once lost, is nearly impossible to fully regain. Please, Rebecca said, moving toward Marcus, please don't let this ruin us. Marcus looked at his wife, and I could see the war playing out on his face. Love and fury. Disappointment and hope. The man he'd married her to be battling with the reality of who she'd shown herself to be. That's between you and my son, I said. I won't interfere in your marriage, but I will say this. If you want any kind of relationship with me going forward, things will need to change, fundamentally. Anything, Rebecca promised. I'll do anything. Start, I said, by examining why you felt entitled to judge me in the first place. Look at what your family values and ask yourself if those are the values you want to carry forward. And most importantly, learn that appearances are meaningless. The woman in the Target clothes might be wealthier than you. The man in the old car might own half the city. The quiet woman in the corner might have more class and dignity than you'll ever achieve. I moved toward the door.